The Sword of Truth. That's right. We're going to be reviewing Terry Goodkind's Wizard's First Rule, right there, up in the corner, where the tippy of the sword is pointing. I'm Brian Lee Durfee, author of The Forgetting Moon, The Blackest Heart, and The Lonesome Crown, all published by Simon & Schuster Saga Press. And I am going to be reviewing Terry Goodkind. That's right. Let's get into this. I started reading Terry Goodkind when The Wizard's First Rule very first came out. In fact, I would buy the mass market paperbacks each year that one of these things would come out. I would read them. I remember my initial impression of Wizard's First Rule was pretty lukewarm. However, I enjoyed it enough to get book 2, book 3, book 4, book 5, book 6, book 7, book 8. And then I kind of stopped at the 8 books. All those paperbacks, I got rid of them. I got rid of all of those paperbacks that I bought. Donated them to the prison library. Here's the thing. If you've followed my reviews, you know that I work at the Utah State Prison, and I used to help run all their libraries, 6 libraries. The number one favorite book of the inmates was Swan Song by Robert McCammon. I could not keep that book in stock. The second most favorite series of the inmates was Bernard Cornwell's Saxon Tales about the Vikings, because all the inmates think that they're Vikings. And so I could not keep that series in stock. The third most popular series with the inmates was Terry Goodkind's Sword of Truth. I could not keep any of these books in stock. I mean, the inmates just gobbled them up. And I remember reading them back in the 90s when they were coming out, back when I was in college and I was a younger person. And like I said, I was kind of lukewarm on the first one, and I started liking them more and more as the series progressed. And so let's talk about it. What happened was Terry Goodkind, like I said, I donated the whole set. I thought, I'll never reread these again. I remember reading them, and they were okay back in the day. I don't think I'll ever reread these again. I used to have 5,000 books up in my library. I kind of weeded them out. I got rid of about 1,500 of them that I thought, I don't think I'll ever read these again. My Terry Goodkind collection was part of that got culled out and donated to the prison. And then I didn't have any Terry Goodkind books for 5-6 years. And then Terry Goodkind passed away. And I was like, oh, that sucks. I'd kind of like to read them again now. I'd kind of like to read but I'd already donated them. So, as luck would have it, Tor Books has re-released all the paperbacks in these wonderful matching set. At least the first 8 of them are matching, which is the 8 that I had, the 8 original ones I had anyway. I mean, we all know the series goes far beyond 8 books. I don't even know how far it goes now, but I stopped at 8. I will keep it at 8. I like this set because they all match. They all have wonderful, now we always talk about the book cover artwork here. They all have wonderful paintings by my good friend, Mr. Keith Parkinson, who's also unfortunately passed away. So Keith Parkinson did all of these wonderful illustrations for and Tor Books has this nice set of black and gold typeface with the Terry Goodkind paintings, or not the Terry Goodkind paintings, but the Keith Parkinson paintings. And so I ended up rebuying all 8 for my collection because now they all match, actually. The original paperbacks didn't match. They were all over the place in style and everything. So I'm actually pleased that I donated my original set and got a new set. So let's talk about Wizard's First Rule. That's what we're here for, right? Enough with the history and background of all that nonsense. You know, Terry Goodkind takes a lot of crap in the fantasy booktube book review world. I mean, just in general, for whatever reason, there's a lot of readers that don't like these. You know, like I said, the inmates, the Utah State inmate, they love him. And I have a feeling that a lot of other people in the world love him too, because these have sold gazillions and gazillions of copies. So the dude is doing something right. So I'm like, when I reread these, I'm going to try to figure out what this guy's doing right that has made these things such massive, huge sellers. Well, first of all, they were published a long time ago. This came out in the early 90s. Fantasy was a lot different back then. I mean, these books have a very like late 1980s type fantasy feel, early 90s fantasy feel, very quest heavy, very Wheel of Time-ish, very, not very, it's the orphan farm boy trope, the quest, the Dark Lord, the magic talismans that will destroy the Dark Lord or maybe help the Dark Lord become even darker. It's pretty standard fantasy stuff. Thing is it's done pretty well. I mean, I just reread this and I was surprised at, because in the last 20 years, all I've heard is just people just kind of crapping all over the Terry Goodkind books. And I'm saying, as a professional author myself, I think the criticisms are a wee bit unwarranted. I think the dude does all right. And there's stuff we can learn. As writers, I always give a little bit of writing advice in these videos. For you young writers out there, you would do yourself a good service to read some of these Terry Goodkind books and study the way he describes things. He goes into as much detail as Tad Williams, as Robert Jordan, when he describes scenery, people, monsters, magical beasts, forests, rivers, castles. I mean, he goes into detail, and you need to figure out how he does it, because he does it well, and he's got good sentence structure and good word choices in those descriptions, and you really get a sense of where you're at all times in these books, especially the first one. I don't remember a whole hell of a lot about, like I said, I've only read them all once when they were coming out. I remember, they were decently and fairly enjoyable. I'm glad I got the collection back, at least the first 8. Because they're solid. I mean, they're pretty solid from a pure writing standpoint. Just fundamentally, they're solid. Now, can we nitpick some of the characters and some of the plot? I think we can. I'm not going to get into that too much. I'm not going to nitpick too much because, like I said, this is kind of a groundbreaking fantasy series in a way. So we got to kind of forgive a lot of the things that maybe we don't see now in modern fantasy that he's put in his stuff. Like a lot of plot holes, a lot of plot holes. Anyway, let's get into the story. What's it about? It's a very quest-oriented fantasy series. We've got Richard Cypher. He starts out in his little village by himself. His brother Michael is kind of a D-bag, and he meets and Richard meets Kaylin Amnell up in the forests, and he rescues her from some outlaws that are chasing her, and this, that, and the other. And Richard's father has this book full of secrets. Oh, my notes just fell. Let me pick them up. Otherwise, I'd be staring at the ground. God, I mean, like I said, if everything went perfect in these videos, they just wouldn't be Durfee videos. God, where were we? Oh, we were talking about the book. We were talking about Richard's father's book that has, that talks about these 3 magical boxes that we need to find these things. Otherwise, Dark and Rawl, the Dark Lord of the world, will, overtake the world and the underworld and just make everything miserable for everybody. And, well, of course, we can't have that happen. We can't have, the Dark Lord win, right? So Richard and his buddy Zed, kind of like a wizard dude, and then his buddy Chase, who's kind of like a fighter guy, and then Kaylin and Richard, the 4 of them, decide to go over the boundary and into the other realm to, solve things, as it were. And Richard and Kaylin get separated from Zed and Chase, and they have to go by themselves. And they meet up with a cast. They just meet up with, it's just quest. It's just they're questing, and they're just meeting up, one problem after the next, after the next, after the next, one problem after the next. Like, there's evil queens, they run into cannibals, mud people, witch women, magical beasts. They're running into trouble after trouble. And some of the chapters are flipping back and forth between the bad guys and Richard. And, she's Richard. Kaylin is a character called a confessor. She's kind of like got magical powers. Richard may or may not have magical powers, but he's got this sword, and Kaylin kind of bestows upon Richard the mantle of, you are the seeker of truth, Richard. It is you that will be the seeker of truth. And then he's got the sword, which kind of becomes the sword of truth. There's a lot of cool things happening. I mean, there's a lot of stuff. It's all quest-oriented, though. It's travel. It's a travel-log journey to get to the bad guy, to stop the bad guy from doing bad guy things. And also find these, magical boxes and stuff that are kind of mysteriously hidden. It's a decent plot. It's a decent plot for a fantasy. More than decent, because, they've sold millions of copies. People love these. People love these books. And then Richard. Okay, so these were, in the time, people call these kind of like maybe almost borderline young adult fantasies, but they're not. They're really not young adult. They are adult. And in their time, early 90s when this came out, it was probably considered the grimdark of its day for a brief sliver of time. There were some disturbing things going on in this book. There were young people being killed and cannibalized. There were pedophiles, murderous pedophiles. There was sexual bondage. There was a lot of twisted stuff going on in here. It's like you're reading, it's very kind of jarring, because it does sort of come off as a young adult novel for a good portion of it. And you're just sort of reading this nice, happy-go-lucky kind of quest for a lot of it, and then all of a sudden there's people getting their privates cut off. Just. Oh well, where did that come from? What the? It's just. That literally, it's that jarring. So if we want to discuss things that maybe our author could have handled a little more delicately, yes, there are some plot points and things that could have been handled a little more delicately. And there are some plot holes, some travel issues, some time-space continuum issues, where how it took these guys, a gazillion light years to reach from point A to B, but then they magically go back, kind of a thing. There's a few little things here to bother me. It's not a perfect kind of a thing. So I do understand why people criticize it. That is not a word. Criticize. I understand why people criticize. I understand why people criticize it. But I think they're being too critical. If for people that think it's the worst book they've ever read, they're out of their minds, because, there's worse stuff out there than this. I give Terry Goodkind's first book in the Sword of Truth series, The Wizard's First Rule, I give it a solid 6.5. Slightly above average for me. Not super good, but definitely readable. Definitely something you can learn from if you're a writer. And an pretty enjoyable story. And if I remember correctly, the series gets better after the first book. I actually think the first book is the weakest one. So we'll see when I reread these things, and then we'll get some reviews. But for now, Wizard's First Rule gets a 6.5 from Durfee. And let's go with that. All right.